They put a pen in my hand while I was still coming up out of the anesthesia, and my youngest boy leaned down close to my ear and told me it was just the hospital paperwork. 9 months later, I walked out my own back door in my sock feet and found three young men in orange vests driving survey stakes into my wife's rosebed, and the one holding the clipboard looked up at me and said, "Sir, we were told the owner had already been notified." Already been notified. I want you to sit with that word owner a minute, because I sure did. I stood there in the wet grass with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, 79 years old, on ground my grandfather cleared with a mule and a grub axe, and a young fellow polite enough to call me sir had just informed me that I was not the owner of the place I was standing on. My name is Alcide Bergeron. Everybody in Bayard Parish has called me Al since about 1962. I am 79 years old, and for 44 years I was a pan man at the Bayard Sugar Cooperative down on the Parish Road, which is a job most people have never heard of, and I am going to explain it to you because everything that happened to me afterward makes sense only if you understand it. Before I take you back, do me one small kindness. Tell me what is in the cup sitting next to you right now and what town it is being drunk in. Coffee, tea, ice water, does not matter. I read those. It helps an old man know who is sitting with him while he talks. A pan man boils syrup down until sugar comes out of it. That is the plain version. The true version is that you stand in front of a copper vacuum pan the size of a fuel truck in a building where the air is 112 degrees and smells like burnt caramel and wet iron, waiting on a moment you cannot see. Somewhere in there, at a minute nobody can put on a clock, the sugar decides to become sugar. Grain, we call it. And when it comes, you have got about the length of a hymn to drop that pan, or you cook the whole strike into molasses and throw away 11 hours of cane. So how do you know? You use a proof stick. Mine is brass, about as long as my forearm, with a little cup at the end and a wood handle worn down to the shape of somebody else's grip because it was not mine first. It was my father's. Ovid Bergeron, who came into that mill in 1931 at 14 years old and left it in 1976 with a bad back and 1.5 good lungs. You reach that stick into the pan through a port. You pull up a bead of boiling syrup. You let it cool half a second on your thumb, and then you press your thumb and your first finger together and pull them apart slow. If a thread comes out between them and holds, and does not break and shines a little, the grain is there. Then you drop the pan. My father put that stick in my hand when I was 17 years old and told me the only thing about the trade he ever said twice. You do not strike on the clock, you strike on the thread. I have thought about that sentence in some strange places in my life. Standing in my wife's graveside 4 years ago. Sitting in a truck outside a funeral home in 1994 with a daughter of 31 inside it. And I thought about it hardest in a parish council meeting room this past spring, with a brass stick in my shirt pocket and 140 people behind me. But I am getting ahead of myself, and that is a bad habit in a man who is telling you something true. Let me put the people down first. My wife was Odile. 49 years. She taught 3rd grade at Sacred Heart until they closed it, and then she taught 3rd grade at the parish school, and there are men in their 50s in this town who still stand up a little straighter when she used to walk into the feed store. She died 4 years ago in March. Congestive heart failure, slow, at home, in the front room, with the window open because she said the room smelled like medicine and she would rather smell rain. We had 2 children. Renee was the first. She was killed on the highway outside Thibodaux in 1994 when a gravel truck came across the line. She was 31. She left behind a baby girl. That baby girl is Luann Bergeron. She is 22 now. She is finishing at the Parish Community College to be a nurse technician, and she has her grandmother's hands and her mother's laugh, and she has slept in my back bedroom on and off her whole life. She calls me Pop. And then there is Emile, my youngest. Everybody calls him Mick, and has since he was 4, and I could not tell you why anymore. He is 51 years old. He is not a bad man. I want to be careful and honest right here at the front, because it would be easier for you to listen to this if I told you my son is a snake, and he is not a snake. He is a man who has never once in his life been able to sit still inside a hard week. He went into crawfish processing about 6 years ago with a fellow from Huma and a leased building and a note he signed without a lawyer. And by the time it fell over, it had taken his savings, his truck, and most of the way he used to look at people. And there is one more, and I have to tell you about him carefully because you will not understand what he took unless you understand what he was given. Theo Guidry, 46 years old. In our part of the world, when a child is baptized, somebody stands up at the font and takes him, not as a nice gesture. It is a promise you make out loud in front of a priest and about 90 people. In 1980, Odile and I stood at that font for Theo Guidry because his mother was Odile's cousin and his father was already gone, and we said the words. We meant them too. I paid for his trade school. I co-signed his first work truck in 1998, and he paid every note on time, and I was proud of it. When he got his notary commission from the state, I drove to the parish seat and sat in the back of the room in a necktie, which I had worn maybe 6 times in my life, and I clapped so hard the woman next to me laughed at me. In Louisiana, a notary is not the fellow with a rubber stamp at the bank. A Louisiana notary can draft acts, real ones, sales, donations, testaments, whole chunks of a family's history, signed and sealed and carried down to the courthouse to be recorded forever. That is what I gave a boy at baptismal font. And on a Tuesday morning in September, in a hospital room in the parish seat, with a blood thinner and a pain pump running in the back of my hand, that boy notarized my signature on a piece of paper that gave away everything I own. Now go back with me to that September, because I have to be fair to everybody, including myself. I had a gallbladder that went bad and took my pancreas along for the ride, and what was supposed to be a morning procedure turned into 5 days on the 3rd floor with a drain in my side. I was 78. I had never spent a night in a hospital in my life outside of the 2 nights my children were born, and I will tell you something they do not warn you about. It is not the pain that takes you apart. It is that the whole building runs on a schedule you are not on, and after about the 3rd day, you stop being a man with opinions and start being a room number that gets turned over every 2 hours. I remember Mick being there. I remember he brought me a bag of those lemon drops from the store on Prairie Street. I remember Theo coming in on the Tuesday in a pressed shirt with his portfolio under his arm, and I remember him saying, "Parain, this is the Medicaid look-back business. We have got to get ahead of it. And Miss Deschartels down the hall says her mama lost the whole place." Parain. That is what a godchild calls you here. That word has been said to me maybe 4,000 times in my life, and I never once heard anything in it but affection. I remember signing 3 times. I remember the pen being one of those cheap sticks with a hospital logo on it. I remember Theo turning the pages for me because my right hand had a line taped into the back of it and it hurt to lift. Here is what I do not remember. I do not remember reading one single word. And here is the part I have to say plain, because if you take nothing else out of an old man's story, take this. Nobody forged my name. My signature on that document is mine. It is the same signature that is on my marriage license and my mortgage payoff and 44 years of time cards. Nobody held my hand and moved it. I signed it myself. Somebody borrowed my hand for 11 seconds while I was too worn down to ask a question and then let the paper do the rest of the work. That is how it is actually done, not with a mask, with a friendly voice and a clipboard and a bad week. I went home the following Friday. Rufus Dardar drove me because Mick had to work, and I will come back to Rufus because that man saved me in a way neither one of us knew at the time. And then 9 months went by and nothing happened at all. That is the thing nobody tells you either. Nothing happens. You get your strength back. You go to mass. You cut your grass. Life closes back over the top of it like water over a dropped rock. Until the 16th of June, when 3 young men in orange vests came up my back lane with a total station and a bundle of pink flag stakes and started setting them in a straight line right through Odil's roses, which she planted in 1979 and which have never once been moved for anything. I asked the young fellow with the clipboard who sent him. He looked at his tablet, a little embarrassed, and read me a name I had never heard in my life. Ashland Meridian Partners. I asked him what he was staking. He said the boundary and the wellhead, sir, for the due diligence. The wellhead. That artesian well was put down in 1956 by my father and 2 of his brothers-in-law, and it is the only thing on my 60 arpents that anybody from outside this parish would ever want, because it puts out cold, clean water at a rate you cannot get out of a new permit anymore. And my 60 arpents are also the only piece of that whole section with frontage on the parish blacktop. 60 arpents. That is about 50 acres the way most of the country counts it. We still measure the old way here. I called Mick. It went to voicemail. I called him again at noon, and again at 4, and again at 7. Then I called Theo, and he picked up on the second ring, warm as Sunday. "Parain, how is your side?" I told him about the men in the rosebed. And there was a pause on that line. I have been listening to men on radios and telephones my whole working life, and I want to tell you that a pause is information. He was not surprised. He was choosing. Then he said, "That should not have happened yet, and I want you to hear the last word of that sentence, because I did." He told me it was a survey company being sloppy, that there was an assessment going on for the whole section, that it did not concern my place, that he would make a call. He asked about Lou Ann's school. He said he would bring me a plate lunch Saturday. He did not bring me a plate lunch Saturday. And that night, I did what I have done my entire life when something does not add up, and it is the only genuinely useful habit I own. I went to my filing cabinet. It is a green four-drawer that came out of the mill office in 1988, and I have kept every piece of paper I ever put my name to since I was 19. Truck notes, union cards, the receipt for Odil's wedding ring, $41, layaway, 51 years of it, in order, by year. I went to the folder for the year I had my surgery, and I sat down on the floor of my own hallway and went through that folder 3 times. A hospital discharge summary, a bill from the anesthesia group, an itemized statement from the parish ambulance service. Not one single thing from Theo Guidry. For the first time in 51 years, I could not produce a copy of something I had signed. Monday morning, I put on a collared shirt and drove to the parish seat. Now, I have to explain something about Louisiana because our state does not do any of this the way the rest of the country does it. We were built on French and Spanish law and it never got sanded off. We do not have counties, we have parishes. We do not call it probate, we call it a succession, and the district court handles it. In every deed, every act of donation, every judgment of possession in this parish gets carried down to one office and copied into a book anybody in the world can walk in and read. That office is the clerk of court, ground floor, east side, under a ceiling fan that has been squeaking since the Carter administration. The woman behind that counter is Alma Fontenot. She has been a deputy clerk in that office for 31 years. She went to school with my daughter. When Renee died, Alma Fontenot came to the house with a ham and she washed my kitchen floor without asking me, and then she left without saying much, which is the highest form of manners there is. I told her I wanted to look at the conveyance records for my own place, and she looked at me over her glasses about 2 seconds longer than a person normally looks at you. She said, "Mr. Al, do you want me to pull it, or do you want to pull it yourself?" I said I would rather see it come out of the book. She brought me the index first, which is a fat gray volume with names down the left side. Bergeron takes up a page and a half in his parish. She ran her finger down and stopped, and turned the book around so it faced me and pointed at a line dated the September before. There was an entry there I did not put there. Act of donation. Inter vivos. Grantor, Alcide J. Bergeron. Grantee, Emile A. Bergeron. Notary, Theodore P. Guidry. She went and got the bound volume and set it on the counter and opened it flat with both hands, the way you would open a hymnal for somebody who could not hold it. I read it standing up. I read it 3 times. I'm going to tell you what it said, in plain words, because the legal words are designed to slide past a man in a hurry, and I want you to be able to hear one of these if it ever comes at you. It said that I, of sound mind, gave to my son Emile, out of love and affection, the home place and dwelling, the 60 arpents, the camp on the bayou my uncle built, the 1968 tractor, and then a phrase near the bottom that took the wind out of me clean. All other property of the donor, corporeal and incorporeal, wheresoever situated. All other property. And then, 4 lines from the signature, the sentence that told me somebody had thought about this for a long time before that hospital room. The donor further renounces, waives, and abandons any and all rights of usufruct held by him. Now let me tell you why that one line was the tell. When Odile died, we went through a succession here, the ordinary way, and a judge signed what we call a judgment of possession, which says who owns what now and gets recorded in that same book. And what it said is what it says for a whole lot of married people in Louisiana. Odile's half of everything we built went in naked ownership to our children and our granddaughter, and I got a usufruct over it for the rest of my life. Usufruct. It means the use and the fruit. I live in it, I farm it, I lease it, I take the income until I die. And then the naked ownership becomes full ownership in whoever is holding it. Half of that place was already not mine to give in September. Half of that place was theirs already, and everybody in my family knew it, and it had been sitting in that book downtown for 4 years. No ordinary person writing up a nice family paper at a hospital room thinks to put a usufruct renunciation in it. You do not stumble into that sentence. You have to know exactly what is in the record and exactly what it is worth to get it out of the way. I stood at that counter and my ears were ringing. Alma did not say a word for about a minute. She let me have it. Then she said, "Quiet, Mr. Al. Do you want certified copies?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." And then she said the sentence that turned this whole thing. She said, "While I am back there, do you want me to pull everything in that book with your section number on it, or just the ones with your name?" I did not understand the question. I said, "What is the difference?" She said, "Mr. Al, there is other paper on your ground." She was back there, 11 minutes. I know because I watched that clock over the vault door the entire time, and it is the slowest clock in the state of Louisiana. She came out with 3 things. The first was the certified copy of the donation, with the little raised seal on it that makes it real. The second was a recorded memorandum of an option to purchase covering the whole section, including my 60 arpents, in favor of a company called Ashland Meridian Partners out of Dallas, Texas. The third thing was the date on it. Now. My surgery was the 12th of September. That option memorandum was signed and recorded on the 14th of June. 90 days before anybody put a pen in my hand. 90 days before. Before my gallbladder ever went bad. Before anybody in my family knew I would be lying flat on my back in a hospital gown with a drain in my side. That option was signed by Emile A. Bergeron in his own hand as the anticipated owner, and it was prepared and passed before Theodore P. Guidry, Notary Public, in and for the parish of Bayard. They did not take advantage of my surgery. They'd been waiting for something, and my surgery was what came. I sat down in the plastic chair by the water fountain in that hallway, and I put my hands on my knees, and a young mother came by with a stroller and asked me if I was all right, and I told her, "Yes, ma'am, thank you, I am fine," which was a lie so complete that I still think about it. Because here is what was going through my head, and it was not what you think. It was not rage. I want to be honest with you. It came later and it came ugly, and I will get to it. But sitting in that chair, what I felt was something colder and simpler. I felt stupid. 79 years old. 44 years in a mill where a man who does not read the gauge kills somebody. I have got a cabinet at home with 51 years of paper in it in date order because my father taught me that a man keeps his own records. And I let a friendly voice and a hospital pin do to me what a bad note and a slick salesman does to somebody every single day in this country. And most of those somebodies are over 70, and most of them never tell anybody because they are ashamed exactly like I was ashamed in that plastic chair. If you are listening to me right now and something like that happened to you and you have never told a living soul, I want you to hear an old man say it out loud. It is not because you got dumb. It is because they came at you on your worst day on purpose, wearing a face you loved. I drove home the long way past the mill. They shut it down in 2009. The stack is still there. The bagasse yard is all volunteer willow now, and if you slow at the gate you can still smell it, or you think you can, which at my age is the same thing. I did not go in the house. I went out to the camp on the bayou, the one my Uncle Ludger built out of cypress in 1952, and I lit the propane burner, and I put on a batch of syrup from the cane patch I still keep out back for nothing but stubbornness. 2 gallons. A pot job, nothing like a mill. And I stood over that pot from 6 until almost midnight with my father's brass-proof stick in my hand and let the whole thing sit down in me. That is what the trade is actually for. Anybody can boil syrup. What 44 years teaches you is how to stand still in front of something hot for a long time without doing anything to it before it is time. Around 10 o'clock, I pulled a bead and let it cool and pressed my thumb and my finger together and drew them apart, and the thread came out and held and shined. And I did not drop the pot. I stood there with a good thread in front of me, and I let that batch go 5 minutes past, on purpose, just to feel it, just to remind myself what it cost to be late. It goes to molasses. It does not explode. It does not burn the camp down. It just quietly turns into something worth about 1/5 of what it was worth 5 minutes earlier, and you cannot get it back, and there is no argument you can make to that pot. I poured it off into jars anyway, because Odile would have skinned me for wasting it, and I sat down on the steps in the dark with the frogs going. And I did 2 sums. The first sum was the one I wanted to do. Drive to Mick's house at midnight and ask my son to his face what he thought he was doing. And I could see exactly how that went, all the way to the end. He would cry. He would blame Theo. Theo would say, "I misunderstood the paperwork." The 2 of them would have 3 weeks to line their story up and get another document signed and recorded, and I would have gotten nothing out of it but the satisfaction of being loud in somebody's driveway at midnight. The second sum was the one I did not want to do, and it was the one my father would have done, and it took me until about 2 in the morning to admit it. Say nothing. Not one word, not to Mick, not to Theo, not to a soul in this parish. And on Monday, go find myself a lawyer of my own. That is not a dramatic decision. It did not feel brave. It felt like the loneliest thing I had ever agreed to do, because it meant that for however long this took, I was going to have to sit across a table from my own son at Sunday dinner and pass him the rice and say nothing. I did it for 11 weeks. Her name is Genevieve Broussard. Everybody calls her Jen. Her office is over the shoe repair on Court Street, up a staircase with a window unit on the landing, and you get to that landing and you understand you are not dealing with a firm that spends money impressing anybody. I picked her because I asked Alma Fontenot, standing at that counter, who in this parish handles successions and does not take work from landmen, and Alma did not hesitate 1 second. Jen is 58. She wears reading glasses on a beaded chain like a school teacher, and she has a way of listening where she does not nod at you, which throws people. She let me talk for 19 minutes without saying a word. Then she put her hand flat on the certified copies I had brought, and she said, "Mr. Bergeron, before I tell you anything good, I am going to tell you the two hard things, because you have been lied to gently by somebody you love, and I am not going to do the same thing to you," in a nicer voice. I said, "Go ahead." She said, "The first hard thing is that this is going to take months and it is going to be boring. Anybody who tells you there is a fast way is selling you something. The second hard thing is that we are not going to argue that you are not in your right mind." That knocked me sideways. I said, "But I was full of pain medicine. I could not lift my own hand." And she said, "I know. And if I put that in front of a judge, the other side hires a doctor. Your chart becomes an exhibit. Your grandbaby sits in a courtroom while a stranger reads out loud everything that has ever been wrong with your body and your memory. And even if we win, there is a filed pleading in this parish forever saying Alcide Bergeron's capacity was at issue, and that paper follows you into every bank and every doctor's office for the rest of your life." She took her glasses off. She said, "I am not going to put your mind on trial. I am going to put their paper on trial, because their paper cannot hire a doctor." I have thought about that 100 times since. It is the single kindest thing anybody did for me in this whole business, and she did it in the first 40 minutes before I had paid her a dime. Then she went to work, and I'm going to give you the plain version of what she found, because there are people listening to me who have got a folded up something in a drawer right now that they signed for a family member, and I would like it if this were useful and not just entertaining. Number 1. In Louisiana, a donation of land has to be made by what we call an authentic act, a notary and 2 witnesses, all present, all signing. One of the witnesses on mine is a young woman who works the front desk at Theo's office, and she is signed as a witness on 41 acts in that book. Jen leaned back and said, "A witness is supposed to be a person who watched a thing happen. When the same person watches 41 things happen from behind a desk, a court starts wondering what witnessing means around here." Number 2, and this is the one that mattered. Jen turned my copy around and put her pen on that phrase near the bottom. "All other property of the donor, corporeal and incorporeal, wheresoever situated." She said, "Mr. Bergeron, what did you keep?" I said, "What do you mean? What did I keep?" She said, "Read it again and find me the part where you reserve something for yourself to live on, a house you could live in, a piece of income, a bank account, anything." There was nothing. It gave away everything I had and did not reserve me so much as a chair. And she said, "In our law, a donation like that is not a bad deal. It is a null deal. Our civil code says flat out that a donation between living people shall in no case divest the donor of all his property, and that he has to reserve to himself enough to live on. If he does not, a donation of land like this one is null, not voidable, null." She said it so calmly. She said, "They were so greedy they took the chair." I sat there in that office over the shoe repair and I laughed. And then I had to stop because it turned into the other thing. Number 3. She asked me if I had ever made a will, and I sat there and I could not remember. That is what shame does to you, by the way. It makes you doubt things you actually know. I told her I did not think so, and she said, "Think about it and call me tomorrow." And I drove home, and it came to me at a stop sign on Prairie Street with my blinker going. 6 years ago. 2 years before Odile died, when she was already sick. We drove to the parish seat together, and we sat with an older notary named Mr. Hebert, who is dead now, and we each made what our state calls a notarial testament, which is a real will, done in front of a notary and 2 witnesses with a declaration read out loud. And we did not take those home. Odile did not trust a house with paper. We put both of them in the safe deposit box at the credit union, the same box that has had my father's discharge papers in it since 1946. I had not opened that box in 4 years. If you have stayed with me this long, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button now, before I tell you the next part. Because what was in that box is only half of it, and the other half is what Jen Broussard found the following Thursday. And it is the thing that changed this from a story about a stolen farm into a story about which one of them was actually being used. The box first. The box first. Odile's will and mine, folded in the same envelope, her handwriting on the outside. I had to sit in that little curtained room at the credit union with that envelope a while before I could go on. Mine said what I remembered it saying. The home place and the 60 arpents to Lou Ann, my granddaughter, my Renee's girl, held in trust until she is 25 so that no boyfriend and no bad year can get at it. The camp and the tractor and the equipment to a meal. Cash split even. And one line at the end that Mr. Hebert made me say out loud in front of the witnesses and that I had forgotten, I said, which is that this document revokes all prior testaments. A will does not stop somebody from giving property away while he is alive. Jen was clear about that. A will only speaks when you are dead. If that donation had held up, my will would have had nothing left to work on but the tractor. But it did two things. It showed a judge what I actually wanted 6 years ago in front of a notary, in good health, with my wife sitting next to me. And it named Lou Ann. Because up until then, on paper, this looked like a squabble between a father and a son. And the minute you put that testament in front of somebody, it stops looking like that. There is a 22-year-old girl in it whose mother is dead. Now the Thursday. Jen called me at 7 in the morning, which she had never done, and said, "Come at 8, and do not bring anybody." She had gotten the full option agreement, not the little memorandum that gets recorded, but the whole instrument, 41 pages, through a title company that had done work for a neighbor and had it in a file. She had 2 pages flagged. The first was the purchase price. Ashland Meridian Partners was offering, for the section, an amount that came out to a little over $2.4 million, of which my 60 arpents with the frontage and the wellhead accounted for $1.6 million for ground my grandfather cleared with a mule. That has never in one single year made more than about $11,000 off cane. I want to say something to the people listening who have a piece of land and children. It does not have to be a farm. It can be a lot in town, a house that is paid off, 40 acres of pine. The day somebody outside your family decides that ground is worth 10 times what your family has ever gotten out of it is the day the temperature changes in your family. Nobody sends you a letter about it. You just have to watch for the temperature. The second flag page was the assignment clause. Now, an assignment clause is boilerplate. It is in nearly every contract in America. It says who is allowed to hand this deal to somebody else. Jen read it to me twice. The seller's rights under this agreement, including the right to receive the purchase price, may be assigned in whole or in part upon written designation filed with the purchaser. And then she turned to the last exhibit in the back, which is a page nobody ever reads, and there was a written designation. Filed the 4th of October, 22 days after my hospital room. 60% of the seller's proceeds designated to Guidry Family Holdings, LLC. I looked at her. She said, "Mr. Bergeron, do you know who the sole member of that company is?" I did not have to ask. My son signed a paper that gave him my land. Then 22 days later, my godson filed a paper that took most of the money for himself, and my son signed that one too. I sat there and did the arithmetic out loud like a fool. $960,000 to Theo, $640 to Mick, and Mick still owed a fellow in Homa better than $200 on the crawfish business. And Jen Broussard said the thing that I have not been able to shake since. She said, "He did not need your son to own the land. He needed your son to be the name on the paper if this ever went wrong." Somebody once told me that a good foreman never touches the valve himself. He tells you which valve, and he stands where he can see the gauge, and if it lets go, it let go in your hand. I asked her what we do, and she said, nothing loud, "Not yet." She explained it the way you would explain a tide chart. The ground they want is zoned agricultural, and they cannot put what they are planning on agricultural ground. To rezone it, they have to apply to the parish, and the parish cannot rezone anything without advertising it in the official journal and holding a public hearing where any citizen is allowed to stand up and be heard, on the record, in the minutes, forever. She said, "They have already applied." It was in the paper on page 9 on a Wednesday, 4 lines, under the legal notices, where nobody in the world reads. She said, "I could file suit tomorrow and we would win in about 14 months in a room with 6 people in it. Or we could file our petition quietly, record a notice with the clerk that puts the whole parish on notice that the title to that ground is in dispute, and then you and I can walk into that hearing room on the second Tuesday in April, where their money is standing on a stage that they built and pay for and advertise themselves." She put her glasses back on. She said, "They scheduled it. I am just going to attend." And then she said one more thing, and this is the part where I stopped being a man that something was happening to. She said, "Mr. Bergeron, between now and April, I need you to go on being exactly who you have always been. Go to Mass, cut your grass, let your son eat your rice on Sunday. Because if he gets nervous, the first thing he does is call Theo, and the first thing Theo does is fix the paper." I said, "You are asking me to sit across from my own child for 3 months and lie." And she said, "No, sir, I am asking you to wait for the thread." So I waited. And I am going to tell you about those 3 months, because the waiting is where the story actually happened, and everybody always wants to skip to the hearing. First thing Jen asked me for was people who could say what shape I was in that week in September. Not doctors. Doctors get paid to have opinions and juries know it. Ordinary people with ordinary records. Which brings me to Rufus Dardar. Rufus is 81. He was the mill electrician for 36 years, and he drives the van for Sacred Heart, taking people to dialysis and to the eye doctor in Huma for nothing but gas money. He drove me home from the hospital that Friday. And here is the thing about Rufus. Because the church reimburses him mileage, that man has kept a spiral notebook in the door pocket of his truck for 14 years, and in it he writes the date, the name, the pickup, the drop-off, the odometer at both ends, and, because he is Rufus, one sentence about the person. He came over on a Saturday with that notebook, and he sat at my kitchen table, and he found the page. 12 minutes flat. The date, my name, Parish Hospital, the home place, and then his one sentence, written in a truck in September in a hand that shakes a little now. Al, bad off, would not let me carry the bag, had to stop at Prairie for him to be sick, did not know it was Friday. Did not know it was Friday. I read that line and my ears got hot. I did not remember it. I still do not remember it. And Rufus put his big hand over the top of the notebook, embarrassed for me, and said, "Al, you want me to leave this part out?" I said, "No, Rufus. I want you to make me a photocopy at the church and then keep that book somewhere it will not get wet." The second thing I did was harder, and I have to be honest about why. I told Luann I did not want to. She was in her last spring of school, doing clinicals 3 days a week, and she has already lost a mother and a grandmother and does not need to lose the idea that her family is a safe place to stand. But Jen settled it. She said, if she finds out in that hearing room at the same time as 140 strangers, you will not have protected her. You will have ambushed her. So I told her at the camp on a Sunday over a pot. She listened the whole way through the way her grandmother used to, arms folded, chin down. When I finished, she was quiet a long time, and then she said, "Pop, is Uncle Mick going to jail?" I said, "I do not know, and I do not want him to." She said, "Good." And then she started to cry, and then she got mad at herself for crying, which is the Bergeron in her. Then she wiped her face and looked at the pot and said, "Is that ready?" I handed her the stick. I had been teaching her that stick since she was 9, the way my father taught me, which is that you do not explain it, you just let them do it wrong for a few years. She pulled a bead and cooled it and pressed and drew her fingers apart, and the thread came out about half an inch and broke. She said, "Not yet." I said, "No, not yet." She said, "How long?" I said, "That is the whole trade, sweetheart. Nobody can tell you how long. You just have to be willing to stand here." She was quiet, and then she said, "That is a terrible trade," and I laughed so hard I had to sit down on the cooler. The third thing I did was go on being an old man in a small parish in the spring, which turns out to be the hardest acting job in the world. I went to Mass at 9 every Sunday and shook hands at the door. I went to the bouchery on the Saturday before Lent and stood around the black pot arguing about cracklins with the same 4 men I have argued with since Nixon. I paid my taxes. I got my Medicare business straightened out over the telephone with a young lady in Baton Rouge who was very patient with me. I mowed. And every single Sunday, 1 o'clock, my son Mick came and sat at my table. He would eat. He would talk about the saints. He would ask me if my side still pulled when it rained. He would carry his plate to the sink because Odile trained him to, and some things stick. And twice, in 11 weeks, he almost said it. I want you to know that. Twice, he put his fork down and looked at the tablecloth and got about as far as, "Daddy, there is something." And both times he did not finish it, and both times I sat there and I did not help him. That is the thing I will have to answer for someday. Not the hearing, not the lawyers. The 2 times I could have said, "Son, go on and say it," and I let the silence do the work instead, because I was protecting a court date. He came the 3rd time on the Sunday before Easter, and that time he did not sit down. He came up on the porch, and he stood at the screen door with his hat in his hand, 51 years old, and he said, "Daddy, come outside." We sat on the steps. He could not look at me. He said, "There is a man from Dallas coming to the parish council in April, and I need to tell you something before you hear it somewhere." And I said, "All right." And it all came out of him in about 4 minutes, and it came out in the wrong order, the way true things do. He said Theo came to him in the spring, before any of it, and told him the mill money was gone and the parish was dying, and there was 1 buyer and 1 window, and the whole section had to go together or none of it went. He said Theo told him that if I ever went into a nursing home, the state would take the land to pay for it. That Miss Deschotels down the road lost 160 acres exactly that way, and that the only way to keep it in the family was to move it out of my name early and let the clock run. Some of that is even half true, which is what makes it work. There is a look-back period. Nursing homes do eat farms in this country. Theo did not have to make anything up. He just had to take a real fear and point it at me. Mick said, I signed the option in June because Theo said it was just to hold the price. He said it was not binding on you. And then he said, Daddy, when you got sick, I did not think we were doing it right then. I swear to God. He called me at 4 in the morning and said the window was closing. And I said, did you read it? He said, what? I said, the paper in the hospital. Did you read it? And my son looked at me and said, no, sir. I want to be careful here, because this is the exact place where a story like mine usually turns into something I do not want it to be. I did not scream at him. Not because I am a better man than that, because I had been holding it for 11 weeks and it had cooled down into something worse than screaming, and I could feel exactly what it was. It was grief. Plain, cold grief, of the same brand I have felt twice before in my life, standing in the wet grass at 2 different funerals. I went in the house, and I got the folder off the top of the refrigerator, where it had been sitting under the bread box since February. I put it in his hands and I said, page 39. He found it. He read it 3 times the way I had. Guidry Family Holdings, 60%. And I watched my boy's face come apart in a way I have not been able to get out of my head since. Because he did not say, that is a lie. He did not say, there is an explanation. He just went a color I have only seen once before, on a young man at the mill who put his hand somewhere he should not have and had not looked down at it yet. He said, 60. I said, 60. He said, he told me it was going to be 40,000 for his trouble. And then he said out loud, to nobody. Well, look at that. We sat there a long while. A truck went by on the parish road and blew the horn because that is what people do here, and neither one of us waved. Finally, he said, Daddy, what do you want me to do? I could hear that he wanted a job, because a job is easier than a conversation, so I gave him one. I said, 2nd Tuesday of April, 7 o'clock, Parish Council Chambers. Wear a collar. Sit in the back row on the left. Do not come sit by me. Do not talk to Theo. Do not talk to anybody. And do not say one word until I turn around and say your name. He said, and then what? I said, and then you tell those people the truth about June. He looked at me. He said, Daddy, that is going to put me in it. I said, son, you have been in it since June. The only thing left to decide is whether you walk in there or get carried in. He was quiet. Then he asked me the only question that mattered, and he asked it looking at the porch boards. He said, are you going to press charges on me? And I said the thing I had worked out at 2 in the morning about 6 different times, and I meant it. I said, Emile, I am 79 years old and I have got 1 child left. I am not going to spend what I have got left putting you in Angola. But I am not going to lie for you either, and I am not going to hand you money to make this quiet. You are going to stand up in a room full of people who have known you since you were in diapers and say what you did. That is the price. It is the only one I am charging you, and it is going to feel like more than jail for about 90 seconds. He got up. He put his hat on. He said, yes, sir. And then he stopped at the bottom of the steps and said, without turning around, Mama would not have let me get that far. And I said, no, but she is not here, so it is going to have to be you. The 2nd Tuesday in April. Bayard Parish Council Chambers is a low brick room with a drop ceiling, 7 council members behind a curved desk, a flag on each end, and about 90 folding chairs. There were 140 people in there that night. They had to open the doors to the hallway. Somebody had put a coffee urn on a card table by the door, and it was empty by 5 after. Everybody in that room was somebody's cousin. That is what people from outside never understand about a parish hearing. It is not a courtroom. It is the whole town in one room with the lights on. I sat in the 4th row on the aisle, Jen Broussard on my right, Lou Ann on my left in her school scrubs because she came straight from clinicals. Mick was in the back on the left. Rufus was 2 rows behind me with his notebook and a grocery sack because I could not talk him out of bringing it. Theo came in at 10 till, the way you come into a room you think is yours. Gray suit. He shook 4 hands on the way to the front. He saw me, lifted his chin, friendly, and mouthed the word parrain. I nodded back at him. I want to tell you the honest truth about that moment. Part of me wanted him to have a reason. Right up to 10 till 7 on the 2nd Tuesday in April, some part of a 79-year-old man was still hoping there was going to be an explanation. The landman from Dallas went first. He was good. Slideshow, artist rendering, a number for the tax base, a bigger number for construction jobs, a much smaller number for permanent jobs that he said quickly. He said the words, good neighbor, 4 times. He said the project needed 300 acres contiguous, access from the parish blacktop, and an existing high-capacity water source. Then Theo went up. And he introduced himself as follows: Theodore Guidry, notary public, representing the landowner group and the Bergeron family interests. The Bergeron family interests. I heard Luann breathe in beside me. I put my hand on her arm. He spoke for 6 minutes. He said his godfather, a retired millman, had done what a lot of families in this parish should have the courage to do and moved to protect the property before circumstances made it impossible. He said, and I am quoting him because it is in the minutes, "This is a legacy decision made by a man who understood what was coming." Then the chairman opened public comment. 3 minutes a speaker, cards in the order received. I had turned in card number 11 at 6:30. Numbers 1 through 10 took 40 minutes. A woman worried about her well, a man in favor of the jobs, a fellow who wanted to talk about drainage in 1993 and had to be gabbled down. Then the chairman said, "Card 11, outside Bergeron." There was a noise in that room. Not a gasp. Something lower than that. 140 people turning at once in metal chairs. I got up. I had my father's brass-proof stick in my shirt pocket because I could not make myself leave it in the truck, and I want to tell you that I do not believe an object has power. But I had that stick against my chest and my hands did not shake, and I am not going to argue with whatever that was. I said my name and my address for the record. I said I had lived at that address for 79 years. Then I said, "Mr. Chairman, I am the man that gentleman just called his godfather, and I did not know until tonight that I had made a legacy decision. I would like to correct the record, and I have brought certified copies for the clerk so that nobody has to take my word for anything." I laid it out in 3 minutes, and I did not raise my voice once, because a man who yells in a room like that hands the room to whoever stays quiet. I said, "There is an act of donation in the conveyance records of this parish signed by me in a hospital bed 2 days after surgery. My signature on it is real. I never read it. It gives away every single thing I own and reserves me nothing to live on. And the lawyer sitting behind me will tell this body that under the law of this state, a donation that leaves the donor nothing is null." I said, "There is an option to purchase recorded on this ground signed by my son in June, 90 days before I ever got sick." I said, "There is a designation in that option, filed 22 days after that hospital room, sending 60% of the money for my family's land to a company owned by the gentleman who just stood up here and called himself the Bergeron Family Interests." I said, "There is a notarial testament in my safe deposit box, made 6 years ago with my wife beside me, leaving that ground to my granddaughter, who is sitting in the second seat of the 4th row in her school scrubs." And I said, "Mr. Chairman, my lawyer recorded a notice with the clerk in February that the title to this property is disputed. It was public the whole time. Nobody read it. I understand that, because I did not read something either, and it cost me everything I have." Then I handed the folder to the clerk, and I sat down. The parish attorney leaned into his microphone and asked the applicant one question. "Does your client have a purchase agreement with a party whose ownership is currently under a recorded notice of dispute?" The man from Dallas stood up and said he would have to consult counsel. The chairman deferred the item indefinitely. It never came back. Then I turned around in my chair and I said, "Emile," and my son stood up in the back row on the left in a collared shirt and told 140 people who have known him since he was in diapers exactly what he signed in June and exactly what he did not read in September. It took him about 2 minutes. His voice went at the end. "Nobody sent a word." Theo Guidry left through the side door before Mick finished, and I have not spoken to him since. Here's the rest of it quick, because you have been kind enough to sit this long. The donation was declared null last November. There is a judgment in that same book downtown now, recorded 3 lines under the thing it undid. Jen filed a complaint with the state about how that act was passed, and Theo surrendered his commission rather than answer it, which I did not oppose, and which is the one door I left open on purpose. A man ought to have somewhere to walk to. Whether he walks anywhere good is not up to me. Mick sold his boat. He is back at the co-op driving a loader. He owes a man in whom money, and he is paying it a little at a time, and it is going to take years, and it should. He comes on Sundays. We do not talk about it much. Some weeks, he is a man attempting to be somebody, and some weeks, he is just a man getting through a Sunday. And I have decided that both of those count. Anne sat her boards in June and passed. And this past October, I did the thing right that I should have done 10 years ago. I sat down in my own lawyer's office, with a notary I chose and 2 witnesses who actually watched, and I gave the naked ownership of that ground to Luann and kept the usufruct for myself in writing, so I have got a house and an income until the day I am done with both. It took 90 minutes, and it cost me less than a good set of tires. If you own anything at all, and your name is the only thing holding it, go do that. Not with your children's notary, with yours. And keep the copy. Last Sunday we boiled a batch at the camp. Luann had the stick. She dipped and cooled it on her thumb and pressed and drew her fingers apart, and a thread came out and held and shined, and she said, "Pop, it is there!" And she killed the burner without waiting for me to tell her. My father was a hard man who said very little, and the truest thing he ever handed me was not the stick. It was this. Sugar will not grain 1 minute before it is ready, and it will not wait 1 minute after, and there is no argument in the world you can make to it. All you get to do is stand there and be paying attention when it comes. I got there late, 9 months late, and it cost me a son's good name and a godson I loved since a font in 1980. But I got there, and she does not have to wait on me anymore. She calls the strike now. I just hold the stick.